and thank you for coming to my talk. Going to talk a little bit about making some decisions in cybersecurity and also on your farm. And hopefully this will help you create a functional ecosystem. So before that, just a little intro about who I am in case you don't know me. My name is Jamie Levy. I am currently the Director of Research and Development at Huntress. I'm also known by CLEDA, and I'm also a core developer for the volatility framework. I'm also a co-author for the Art of Memory Forensics. I've also done speaking at various places and trainings at places like Black Hat and other places as well. I'm also a former college professor. I used to teach core computer science courses as well as computer forensics courses at various places. What you may not know is that also I run a small farm, and on that farm, I have various things like Jacob sheep, Shetland sheep, goats, emus, and poultry. You can see a couple of examples from my farm. I have a picture of the Zacchaeus, which is my former herd sire, Jacob sheep. He's pretty cool looking with his 4 horns there. And I also have Polish chickens, which you can see an example of there as well. Formerly, I also used to have alpacas and llamas. At some point, I had like over 20 something alpacas and llamas, and I got rid of the last one this year. So one small caveat, I don't really consider myself an expert in any of these things. Hopefully what you'll be able to do is take away some of my mistakes and be able to use them and not do them yourself. I'm also available to discuss any ideas that anybody might have in either cybersecurity or farming as well. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about creating an ecosystem just to make sure that we're all on the same page. This is where you're trying to make sure that the organisms are interacting well with their environment and with each other within that environment. And what you're trying to do is make sure that these things work for you and not against you. So talking about the cybersecurity side, before you get started, you might want to figure out which kind of ecosystem do you want to be in. And there are so many options and you can't know all the things. So trying to figure out like, what do you like to do the most? Do you like breaking stuff? Do you like being a little more proactive? Maybe you want to do something in red teaming. So these are some of the things that you could kind of focus on: pen testing, vulnerability research, et cetera. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. There's a whole bunch of other things that you can do as well within the red teaming side. Maybe you like to do more like investigative work or preventative type work. Maybe that's going to put you over into the blue teaming side. So things like digital forensics, instant response, detection engineering, being a SOC analyst. Again, not an all-inclusive list here. Maybe you like to straddle both sides. Maybe that's more your thing. So maybe you want to do threat hunting or be a security researcher, reverse engineer. Now, that's not an all-inclusive list either. And some of these might be a little more blue leaning or red leaning, depending on the person and also the environment as well. Other things that you can do is further specialize in your niche. So maybe you want to focus on hardware. Maybe you want to focus on software. Maybe it's a particular programming language that you want to focus on. Maybe you want to only do network investigations. Maybe you only want to look at disk or RAM. Maybe you only want to focus on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And of course, there's other things: embedded systems, infrastructure, mobile. There's all kinds of different things that you can specialize in. Finding a specialization kind of helps you focus on one particular thing and doesn't leave you scattered trying to figure out what do you want to do. Now, of course, there are people that do well as jack of all trades, but that's not necessarily for everyone. And since there is a plethora of things within the cybersecurity landscape, you can definitely find something that would be interesting for you. Now, maybe you're not feeling like you're so super technical, but you still want to be involved in cybersecurity some way. And so there's all these adjacent roles that you can consider. I know some people kind of poo-poo this, like, oh, well, these people aren't technical, they're not, doing the cutting edge research or whatever. But think about it. Every cybersecurity company that you have has these roles in order for them to be able to be successful. You have to have accounting, you have to have marketing, sales, recruiting, and all of these things in order to be successful. And if these people know something about cybersecurity and are interested in it, passionate about it, they're going to be so much better at their roles. And maybe that's something that you want to do. Maybe you want to be in one of these adjacent roles, helping better further the cause. And I think one thing that also kind of gets left out a lot is education. A lot of people will send their teams off to private trainings, but why not have an education in department in-house, something that can make custom education for the entire company to make sure that they understand exactly the types of things that you're trying to accomplish as a company. So how do you go about creating your own cyber ecosystem? Well, main thing, it needs to be interdepartmental. It can't just be in silos. You want to have interactions between teams. You want to have interactions between departments. You want to make sure that you have common goals. You want to make sure that you have trust. You also want to make sure that you have some policies in place that define the interfaces between those different departments and teams, and make sure that everybody understands what the boundaries and expectations are. It's a lot of hard work, and but if you can get that established, you can break down the silos, and people are working better together instead of apart. And there are different frameworks that you can use in order to try to help build teams and build trust. One of the most common frameworks that you kind of hear about is by Patrick Lencioni. He has a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Definitely recommend reading that if you're trying to build a team and trying to figure out why your team is dysfunctional, why they're not getting along, or why they're not performing well. It can kind of give you some pointers and help you figure out how to establish the trust, avoid the conflict, build the commitment and accountability, and get results. So hopefully, once you've been able to establish your team and figure out exactly all the different people that you need on that team, figure out how to get them interacting with other teams, get them interacting with other departments, you're going to end up with something like this. And notice that this is not at all inclusive. Obviously, there's many other departments and teams and things that make this whole machine work, this whole company work. But you can see kind of an example here of where we have threat hunters that are interacting with detection engineers. Threat hunters are going to find things that should make valid detections. Detection engineers are making the detections for the software, right? That's actually like detecting things. I mean, without detections, you don't have anything really to talk about from your security software. You have the SOC, which is also feeding off of the detection engineers. You have incident responders, which can be feeding detections to the detection engineers. And threat intel, which is kind of profiting from everything below it and being able to build and establish patterns of things. And you might have research, which is taking all of that and figuring out how to build that into a product and interacting with product and engineering in order to make that happen. You might have your support team who's helping product figure out like what are the bugs, what are the issues that customers are seeing, how can we improve things there. And you have sales and marketing, which are also kind of profiting off of this whole machine in order to market towards customers and get sales. And so you can see kind of how all these things interact together and hopefully push the company forward. So now that you've got this running, you got to make sure that you're also properly staffed. So you need to identify the roles that you have within your ecosystem. You need to make sure that you have some redundancy in those roles as well. You don't want to have just one person who is in charge of this one particular role, because if they get sick or leave, then basically you don't have anything to do there. And you want to also make sure to measure how you're doing. as a team, as a company. So keeping up with metrics, KPIs, making sure that people have OKRs. So just trying to figure out like what's actually going on. And that also helps you establish how much headcount do you need as well. And then making sure that you're always training up your people on your team, making sure to bring in more junior people and train them up, because eventually people are going to want to maybe do something else, or they're going to outgrow the particular role that you have. For instance, if you have a SOC, like people don't usually stay in the SOC much more than 2 years. So you have this constant kind of turnover. So you need to make sure that you have training in place so that you can have more junior people and give them opportunities as well. Also, on the flip side, if you're a potential new hire, you want to make sure, how is the team run? Are they working with other departments, or are they just basically silos? Because siloed teams really don't do very well in my experience. So you want to make sure that you have some kind of interactions with marketing, with sales, with other places within the company, so that they know, they have that visibility of like what is actually impactful and what needs to actually be worked on. Also, as a manager, you should be mindful of your impact on people. So there have been studies that show that managers do actually have an impact on mental health for their direct reports. So make sure that you're mindful of that, that you do have an impact on others. Also, make sure to speak up for yourself and your team. Is somebody saying something against your team? Don't just leave them in the lurch. I know sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Maybe you don't want to get yourself in trouble either, but that's what you're there for. Also, coaching sessions. A lot of times companies will have coaching sessions or things available as part of your perks. So if you do have things like that, take advantage of it, because a lot of times everybody has things that they can improve on. I know for sure I'm not perfect, and there's things that I need improvement on. So I try to take advantage of these things as well. And just try to think about like your ecosystem. You're building it, you're creating that. You need to be able to allow it to flourish and just try to make it work for you. And of course, self-care for yourself, for your direct reports, for everybody within this working organism. Like, take vacations, avoid overworking, do go outside and interact with other people. And also kind of be mindful of like how your home office setup is. Does your keyboard bug the crap out of you? That's probably helping or hurting your productivity. And also try to encourage hobbies. Like, a lot of people have like book clubs or other things going on, or talk about their hobbies or farming or whatever. So yeah, try to have some kind of hobby that keeps you interested. And that gets to the fun side now, the farming decisions. So this is my hobby slash side business here. So now, I mean, I know a lot of people are kind of moving out of the cities. There's a lot more remote work. People are probably thinking, they want to do something else. They want to maybe grow something or have livestock or have a little farm. Maybe they want to have farm fresh eggs. Maybe it's like from a health perspective. Whatever it is that's making you think about doing farming, make sure that you do a lot of research ahead of time. Make sure you figure out, what do you want to concentrate on? What are you good at? And research the crap out of it, because no matter what, there will always be surprises. So for instance, let's say that you just want to focus on having an orchard. So maybe you want to do apple trees. Do you have a problem with cedar rust in the area, which is something that can affect your apple trees? It basically makes the leaves get brown and kind of rot off the trees. And it's pretty hard to get rid of. Once it's in the environment, I think it's impossible, but it's something that you would have to be constantly dealing with, and may not be worth having apple trees in that particular area. Do you want to do livestock? What type of livestock do you want to do? When I was growing up, we had a dairy farm, and my great-grandparents had a dairy farm, and I used to spend a lot of time on there, mostly on the summers, kind of helping out. And I really liked cows, but I knew for sure, like when I decided to have a farm, I didn't want to deal with cows because they're very large creatures. They could do a lot of damage. You have to have machinery in order to interact with them and safely do vet care. It's a lot of work. Like I knew that ahead of time. I didn't want to get involved in that. And so you need to figure out like what are your limitations, either physically or mentally, whenever you're trying to pick out what type of livestock you want to deal with. And there are many other things that you can focus on: poultry, fish. There's even agritourism. So people opening up their farms to be petting zoos or other interesting things on their farm that kind of bring people to there. Things that you have to consider, like insurance, right? Like, what if somebody gets hurt on your farm? What happens then? Are there certain licenses or things that you have to consider in order to have people on your farm like that? It depends on your area, depends on a lot of things, and so you need to do research into that. And there's, of course, other things that you could do, like goat yoga, goat landscaping, and probably lots of other things with goats. People really like to have goats because they are just these smiley, nice little creatures. And I don't blame you because I have goats as well. So trying to pick a location uh, for your farm. So if you don't already have a place planned out, you might want to take other things into consideration, like what's the connectivity? What's going to be your internet over there? Do they have fiber? Do they have dial-up? Are you going to use satellite? Uh, what are you going to do? So that might be like a big thing. You might not even have cell phone service wherever you end up, because as you start to get outside the city, things are not quite as planned and nice as you would expect. Also, try to figure out like your distance to civilization. Like, are you going to be far away from a hospital if you're going to need it? These kind of things. Figure out the rules of regulations over there. So like, try to figure out like what are you going to be able to do? Like, don't get into a place where you have an HOA where they're not going to allow you to have livestock or the things that you want, right? And then figure out what are the opportunities, like what's needed in that area. Is everybody doing alpaca farming? Maybe you don't want to do that because everybody else is doing it, and so you're not going to be able to make a profit for it. And try to figure out, like, are there other people with similar interests in your area? Are there farmers that also concentrate on particular types of goats or sheep that you have? Uh, Maybe that could be like a help network that you can set up. Try to get to know them. Also, try to figure out how far away is the vet from where you live, because there's going to be emergencies. There's going to be hurt goats or whatever. Like, how long is it going to take a vet to get out there to help you if you get into an emergency situation? Other things that you have to consider about wherever you pick to live are climate. So, for instance, if you're wanting to focus on plants, there's certain USDA zones that certain plants aren't going to live in. Like, if you live in like a very cold area, maybe you're not going to be able to focus on tropical type plants like lemon trees or something like this. So you have to be mindful about where you're going to be and if it's going to work out. You might want to also consider water sources. Will you have enough water for irrigation? Do you own the water source? I mean, some places you don't really own the water that's on your property even. So try to consider that. Also, try to consider, like, is this place prone to flooding, right? Because that could be a big problem for you as well. Figure out the terrain. Sometimes you might live in like a really hilly place, and so that might be difficult. Like, if you're wanting to focus on hay or something like this, like, you probably don't want to live on a cliff. That's not going to work out very well. And then think about also parasites and pests, like what's really prevalent in the area. Are there certain types of worms or things that are going to affect your livestock? Like, for instance, on the eastern coast, if you have alpacas, they could be prone to getting managerial worm, which is something that comes from white-tailed deer. So anywhere that you live where you have white-tailed deer in the area, that could definitely affect your livestock. And that could be like a potentially fatal disease from that parasite. Also consider the native animals. What are you going to be brushing up against? All right, do you have coyotes? Do you have bears? Do you have bobcats? What's out there? What do you need to protect against? Also consider the soil conditions, whether or not you're going to grow something or if you're going to have livestock, the soil can affect all of these things because everything needs certain nutrients. So you can actually get those things tested from local universities usually as well. And then also consider shelter. So if you're focusing on livestock, they all need shelter of some sort, depending on where you live. Maybe a lean-to, which is a three-sided shelter with a roof. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe you need a full enclosed barn that you can close them in if you live in like a really cold area and you need to protect them from the drafts and the cold. So these are all things that you have to consider. And of course, a lot of that could also affect the cost that you have, especially from the shelter perspective. So hopefully after you've considered all these things, you'll end up with some kind of a landscape to look at. And other things that you have to consider once you get everything set up are also the vegetation, which I forgot to highlight. So like you might have certain types of trees or things that might be poisonous to your livestock. For instance, cherry trees, wild cherry trees, when they start to wilt and the leaves start to die off in the fall, they release, I think it's cyanide, and whenever you have something like a goat or whatever that eats this, eventually it poisons them and they could just die suddenly from that. And so these are things you have to consider also, is like, are there cherry trees like along the fence where these leaves are going to get into the fence, or if a branch breaks or something, am I going to end up with a bunch of dead goats, right? So there's a lot of other things that you have to consider within your environment. But hopefully at some point you'll end up with something like this. This is not my house. I think this is just really pretty. But you can see like the things that they have to contend with here, like things are a little bit hilly. Maybe the ground is rocky also, which is a little hard to dig. But you can see that they've been able to put up a fence, and they have trees there to provide some shade, but not too much, especially not around the fence, right? Because if a tree falls on your fence, it's pretty much done for. So yeah, these are other things that you have to consider as well. So also you need to have some goals. What do you want to do with your farm? Is it just fun? Is it a hobby? Is it just, for the kids to play with the alpacas? Is it just you've always wanted to have horses? Or are you going to have maybe like a business side? And maybe the business side doesn't start out as like, this is what I'm going to do as a business. Maybe it's something to kind of help make ends meet, right? Because animals are expensive, feed is expensive, hay is expensive. Eventually, you might want to try to figure out a way to kind of lessen your expenses. And so that's where the business side comes into. And you want to make sure that you're covered as far as any licenses or certifications that you need. You might want to create an LLC to kind of protect you from that as well. And then figure out like your banking expenses. You might even need to get an accountant depending on how crazy your farm business gets. And so these are things that you have to consider and kind of go in and plan. And so let's say that you've decided to focus on livestock or maybe poultry. And so there's things that you have to consider: the care of the animal, the needs, the fencing in order to contain that animal. You also need to figure out the distance from a veterinarian, and also does the veterinarian actually take care of that particular animal that you have? Like for instance, when I had alpacas, it was hard finding a vet who would actually deal with alpacas. Like most of them only dealt with horses or goats, and they didn't feel comfortable enough to deal with alpacas. But eventually I found a couple of different vets. But these are things that you have to consider. Also, you should get comfortable giving medical care because a lot of times the vet can't just come. Like if you're in an emergency, you need to be able to do basic things like if a goat is kidding or sheep is lambing, like things can happen, things can get turned around. You might have to help and assist in that particular moment. Also, there's a lot of routine care. Different vaccinations and things that you have to give animals. Learn how to give shots so that you don't have to have the vet come out. It's very costly to have a vet come to your property, and there's basic routine care that you can do yourself. Also, you need to figure out like the dietary needs for the animal. Do they need something like copper, or do they need certain minerals or things added to their feed in order to be healthy? And also you have to figure out security, which I'll talk about also, but you can see I got my security team here, my dogs. Nothing's going to get in there and mess with these emus with these dogs around. And you need to figure out how can you let these animals get used to each other. The dog has to get used to the animals that it's protecting. The animals have to get used to the dogs as well. And so this is all like about building trust, building that team of animals and building that ecosystem. You also need to have realistic expectations about your animals. Like animals have, they're sentient beings and they're going to have ideas about how things should go. And it's not always going to be the way that you think that things should happen. And so you need to be able to kind of temper your expectations there. You also need to figure out, are you ready for this? Are you strong enough and healthy enough to deal with all these animals? Because for instance, with sheep, like you have to shear them once a year. Are you ready to take that on? That's something that's part of their basic care. If you're not ready to take something like that on, don't do it. Don't do it to yourself. Don't do it to this poor animal. Because they are basically at your mercy and you have to take care of them. Maybe you need to hire somebody to help you. Maybe you have family who's going to help you. You need to figure out all these things out before you get too far down the line. And so trying to build your team, you need to make sure that you have security. I think just about anywhere that you live, there's going to be some kind of predator situation. There's going to be coyotes, there's going to be bobcats, whatever. You need to have some kind of deterrent. And there's many different thoughts about like what you can use for security. And some people like to use llamas or alpacas because they are quiet. Especially if you live in an area where you do have a neighbor who might not like having dogs barking, then that might seem like a good choice. And I'm going to put that as a caveat, like maybe it's not the best choice, just because llamas and alpacas are prey animals. And even though some of them could be somewhat of a deterrent, or they're kind of big and it might actually kind of scare off things like maybe like a fox or something like that. But like if you have like some dogs that got loose, or if you have really determined coyotes or bobcats, like they're not really a match for them. I mean, llamas and alpacas, their way of fighting back is spitting on things. And you can imagine that doesn't really do much against teeth and claws, right? But if you have certain predators, like if it's really only like foxes or if it's like hawks or something like this, they could be a pretty good deterrent for things like that. Other people might use donkeys. And so, yeah, donkeys can definitely do a lot of damage to dogs and coyotes. And I think in some cases it makes sense. But in other cases, maybe not. Like if you have miniature donkeys, like they could definitely get hurt by dogs. So that probably wouldn't be a good idea. So I usually recommend livestock guardian dogs, and you need to make sure that you get like a purebred, good livestock guardian dog. Like you could get like a Great Pyrenees, Marama. There's a whole bunch of different breeds. It doesn't really matter the breed. Each one kind of has their own different temperament, but they are bred specifically for guarding animals. And I tell you, it's it's not going to be the same thing if you put like a border collie over there, which is bred to like herd animals, or other types of dogs, which are, bred for hunting and other things. The instincts really do make a difference in how the dog reacts to things over time. And so make sure that you do get a good dog. This this is my chief security officer, Luna, and you can see that she's just having a great time out here in the pasture with the little babies and whatnot. This is a recent picture. These are some of my Jacob sheep lambs from this year. And this was my last alpaca, O'Neill, or last llama, O'Neill. And you can see that he's having fun here with his goats that he's playing around with. So these are things that you have to consider. What are the predators? What are the livestock that you're dealing with? And how much noise can you tolerate? Also, other things on your farm that you need to consider are remediations, things you want to get rid of in your ecosystem, things like parasites, weeds, bushes. So you have to make sure that you get the right person for the tool, for the actual job that you're trying to do. So for instance, getting rid of parasites like ticks and other types of bugs like Japanese beetles and things that could be detriment to your farm, make sure that you get some kind of poultry. Guineas are very effective at eating all of these nasty bugs and things on your property. Also, chickens can do a pretty good job. And you can see some of my guinea fowl and some turkeys that I have, and they're just out, having the time of their lives, like eating a bunch of bugs and things. Also, you might want to get goats if you have a problem with weeds and brush on your property. They're great at just clearing out land. So you can get temporary fencing, like electric netting, and you could put that up and let the goats just have at it in various places. So other options that you might have on your farm, and some of these I have, like ducks. Ducks get rid of slugs and snails and other nasty things that some of the other birds don't want to eat. And that's very important because certain diseases like managerial worm, which is fatal, comes across from the white-tailed deer to snails, and then the livestock accidentally eats the snail, either the slime or the snail itself. And so if you have ducks, that helps clear that up pretty well, because the ducks will just wipe that out. So try to figure out like what is the right animal for the job, and try to have a lot of diversity, and that way you'll be able to knock out a lot of these different parasites, weeds, and other things that bother you on your property. So then try to figure out like how could you identify what your market's going to be, and in order to profit. So first of all, what are you going to focus on? Is it going to be eggs? Is it going to be wool? Is it going to be what other byproducts? Are you going to sell off livestock? Are you going to sell them live? Are you going to take them to butcher? What basically are you going to sell? And then figure out, what is your venue? Is it mostly local people? Is it word of mouth? Are you putting things on Craigslist? Are you going on Facebook Market Center? What are you doing there? And then also make sure that you have the certifications. Like, so for poultry and eggs, if you're talking about hatching eggs, like you need to be NPIP and AI certified, so that people know that you don't have certain diseases within your poultry. And this is particularly important if you want to sell over state lines. It's something that's required in order to even be able to ship eggs, that you have the certification. As far as livestock go, if you're selling live livestock, a lot of times you have to have a health certificate if you're selling over state lines. That just for the person who has to take it over the state lines, like in case they get stopped or something, they have that health certificate that says, yes, this particular thing is healthy, whatever it is, so that they're not bringing some foreign items or parasites or disease over the state lines. So hopefully, after you've identified all the different things that you want to focus on, the security mechanisms that you're going to use, you're going to have this nice ecosystem, and you're wanting these things to interact with each other. Like you might want to have these ducks to eat the bugs so that you're not going to have as many parasites. You might want to focus on sheep, and they're going to help keep the the grass kind of mowed down also, and the weeds as well. You want to figure out also, you want to make sure that you have enough room for the animals that you have. You want to make sure that you have more than one pasture also, so that you can do rotations, because that is healthier not only for the pasture but for the animals, that they're not just constantly browsing in only one place all the time. And so it also gives the grass a chance to recover and come back. You want to also want to make sure that you have certain plants and trees and things that are basically good for your environment. You want to make sure that you do leave some trees in your pastures, that you have shade, because especially if you live in a very hot area, like you don't want to just have it like all sunny, because basically sheep and goats, like they need to be able to get out of the sun sometimes. And you want to make sure that all these things interact with each other, so and that they get along, because if you have something that doesn't work on your farm, there's no reason to keep it. If you have a goat who's like constantly getting out trying to get itself killed, or starting to teach the other goats how to get out, maybe that goat shouldn't stay around on your property. Maybe it should go to somebody else's property, or something else, like who has the time to deal with it. So there's a lot of things to consider, but hopefully at the end of this, like you'll be able to get something that's working for you. Crop rotation, animal rotation, everybody working and living happily together. So some takeaways from this: try to make your surroundings work for you. Uh, as I've said so many times, try to find a place that makes sense. Not, all the things are going to be able to live there as far as the climate, everything else. And try to stay positive, because things are going to go bad. Like things are going to die, things are going to get sick. It's just part of being on a farm, and you need to know that going into it. And make sure you don't take on too much. It could get pretty out of hand pretty quickly. Like, I want to know all the things. I want all the things, like alpacas, sheep, goats, everything. And you might take on everything on all at once. Don't do that. And also, like, consider, like, if you do get sheep and goats, like they have very different dietary needs. Like, goats need to have copper, sheep don't have to have copper, and they can actually die if they eat copper. So you have to think about, like, how are you going to handle all of these different animals? Where are you going to keep them? How are you going to keep them where they need to be, and healthy as they need to be? So taking on too much at once is going to definitely set you up for failure. Um, Keep learning also, because there's constantly things that you can learn about the animals and plants and things that you're taking care of. Uh, I'm learning constantly every time I'm figuring out, like, oh, there's something new that I need to know about these particular animals, or something that I'm not doing right. So just make sure that you keep learning. And there's plenty of places on YouTube that you can learn about, and I can give you some links as well. Lots of good people that are showing exactly what they're doing, and also the hard times that they have on the farm as well. And just know that farming is hard. It's so worth it when to me anyways. You could see here with a couple of Shetland lambs that I had this year. Uh, that's what makes it worthwhile to me, is just the new life, and just the happiness that I get from the animals. But I'm not gonna I'm not gonna water it down, that it's hard work, and you need to make sure that you're ready to take that on. So with that, I'll let you know if you have any questions. I can take everything on Slack.
Yeah, we have a few questions lined up for you already. The first one is from the Gibson, who wants to know your personal favorite livestock to keep.
My personal favorite,
Hmm.
um, I think honestly, it's chickens. I think like they're the easiest ones to keep, and I really get a lot of enjoyment out of them. It's amazing. Like they really do have personalities. You wouldn't think that chickens do, but they all do have separate personalities, and they're just sweet animals. And yeah, I would say chickens definitely.
All right, we also had a question from Yale, a more serious line. How do you budget and plan for goat end of life as a farm owner? That's the personal blocker for Yale.
Oh, yeah. So basically, all the goats towards the end of their lives, like they will stay on the farm. I don't I don't have any notions of selling them off after they're a certain age. You get attached to them. So as far as budget goes, that's probably where it just sinks into my pocket. Like it's just a personal thing at that point. Like they're just a pet, and I know that I'm in it for the long haul with them. As far as having to put a goat out of its misery, there's certain methods to dispatch them that I won't get into, but it's something that you have to consider also because you don't want them to suffer. So things can get to a point where you do have to consider that. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Okay, so the next question is how will you take care of your animals while you're traveling? Because you're in a line of work that sometimes involves that.
That is a great question, and I should have highlighted that even more. But yeah, that's something you definitely have to consider is that eventually you'll have to go somewhere, and who's going to take care of it? Luckily, I do have a partner who helps me with this, and so he usually stays home and takes care of the everything. But we do also have some neighbors who can help as well. But of course, the best thing that you can do for everybody involved is be highly organized. So make sure that you have all your feeding routines written up. I have a document in each of the barns, like for the chickens and whatnot, exactly how much does everybody get, exactly how many scoops, what, and whatever, and make sure everything is like highly organized, easy to get to, that the feeding areas are highly organized because you don't want people just tripping over things and slipping in the mud and whatever, because it's going to make the experience like bad for them as well. So yeah, definitely something you have to plan for.